the fascinating and ever-changing world of agriculture. Let's hit the road here in Georgia and meet the farmers, producers, makers, and bakers who keep us all fed and keep us coming back for more. Straight ahead at the fork in the road.
I came from the mud, there's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree, there's roots where I stand.
Georgia farmers, artisans, merchants, and producers, we depend on these men and women every day of our lives through the choices we make and the food we consume. Their strategy and approach is always shifting, but the end game remains the same: result. It's no secret, Georgia is known as the peach state. However, apples are also a big deal in Georgia. And it's not just these rosy red ones that we place on the teacher's desk. There's a wide variety of heritage breeds that were once grown in these North Georgia hills and are slowly finding their way back. Let's begin this week on a mountaintop in Blairsville, Georgia, where a variety of apples are being grown, grafted, and studied. Ray Covington has been working on these hills for quite some time. And the apple trees growing up here have a purpose beyond filling grocery store shelves and farmers markets. Time to take a stroll with Ray through the University of Georgia's Mountain Research and Education Center to learn more about why they grow these trees, this grass, and the multitude of other crops throughout these 415 acres in Georgia's Blue Ridge Mountains.
This place was established in 1930 to address the agricultural needs of this very different landscape in the part of Georgia. We're in the northernmost part of Georgia, the mountains, and a very unique climate zone, Zone 7A. What that means is we get a lot of rainfall, some single-digit temperatures, and a shorter growing season. And so that different set of challenges, this experiment station was established here to address those to help farmers in this region. With this interesting zone, this climate zone for Georgia, anytime we do agricultural research here, you can see that that would translate to the northern states. So if a product works here, it can be marketed out elsewhere above this state in the same similar climate zone. We do corn. When we do variety testing every year, our corn crops are consistent high yielders. We've hit 359 bushels an acre on dry land, which means no irrigation whatsoever. But we do fall short on having large acreages for corn products like that compared to South Georgia. But it's still important to our economy, toward producers for cattle feed and things like that. In this example here, you can see that we have one continuous row and then we have a gap. That's one variety of seed. One variety, so it's what we call a block. And then it will keep going, do that again, another variety of seed. And that machine, it is a combine, but it'll do a soil moisture, it'll do yield monitoring, and also keep a sample for them to look at back in the lab. Here on the edges, see all the damage? See all that damage? So that's because of crows and birds and stuff like that. So we plant border rows, we don't take data off of this, it's on in there. You know, the birds don't go inside, they take the path of least resistance, you know? So they're gonna be browsing out here, not on the interior. Cattle farmers, we have a cattle research program we do on the property. We look at different feed regimens, different feed additives in terms of average daily gain and the overall health and prosperity of the animal. This is red clover and white clover. In these two spots, red over there, white over here. Different varieties that they're developing, looking at high protein content, nitrogen fixation, yield per acre, all the above. Now why? Because that is a fantastic feed source for beef cattle to add protein into their diet to build muscle. Fescue is a great grass. It does well here. Not so good for beef cattle because of an endophyte that raises their body temperature. They're working on some new varieties out here to either decrease the endophyte's prevalence or issues with cattle or reduce it altogether. And then also to improve the palatability of the grass itself. So the animal that's consuming it can break it down and eat it better, that type of thing. And again, free information, Land Grant University. probably the most thing we're well known for is our fruit crops. So you can see behind me apple trees and blueberries. And so apple trees do well up here because we get chill hours during those winter months. We've been doing apple research since we opened in 1930, continue it even today. It's morphed, it's changed. As we incorporate precision agricultural technologies, we're looking at different irrigation systems, disease management. We're also looking at new chemistries to control diseases, new and old diseases that are coming in.
I think it's really neat because it's almost like your job is to try these things, see if they work, so you can test it, so the farmers don't have to.
Exactly. That's the part of our land grant system, is to share that knowledge, and that's what we want. That them not to have to go out and invest in some seed, some strange seed. Let's do it, let's help them, and that way they can become more profitable for their operation. We have about 1,700 trees here, apple trees. Oldest one we think is from the 1960s. At one point, 50% of the apple trees in the United States were this apple.
What is that?
Got any guesses?
Red Delicious?
There you go.
Yeah, it's totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And the cold gave it that shape.
Yes, did all that damage.
All right, what kind of apple is this? Do we know?
Aztec Fuji.
That's what I thought.
No, it isn't. This one, Aztec, obviously a South American name, and then Fuji, Japan. So don't know how those two came together, but I do know that this is a fantastic apple. Every one of these trees above ground is Aztec Fuji, except for the pollinators, which are Red Delicious. But you notice also that there's a different variation in growth in these trees. Everything above ground's the same. In other words, if I take that cutting, it's the exact same as that over there, over there, over there, over there. So why are these different sizes? It's because everything below the ground is different, the rootstocks. And so this is a nice lesson in what the rootstocks actually are controlling. The vigor, the strength, the size of the trees.
And while we are here, we may as well give these Georgia apples a try.
This one you can eat.
Almost has like a caramel taste to it.
Caramel.
Oh my gosh.
Notice when you're biting in that the flesh and the meat gives way to your gums. Just kind of lends its way and opens itself up. It's a really tasty apple.
What I've been learning is there are hundreds of varieties, and it almost seems like a market that really could explode.
You said hundreds of apples, but ramp that up with another zero. There's thousands. Last I heard, there's probably around 8,000 varieties. 200 years ago, people would discover one because they planted by seed. When you plant by seed, it's like our children, they're all different. Most of them aren't real good, not our children, but most of the apples that come up are not that good, which when Johnny Appleseed was planting, that's what he was planting those, but they were mostly for cider, and they didn't mind so bad. But then they'd find that diamond in the rough out there, and then they'd save it, name it, and it becomes something of interest to them. And that's what we're kind of working on, actually reclaiming those lost apples that people 100 years ago, 200 years ago, knew by heart, knew by name, like Red Delicious, like Stamen Winesap, but wouldn't know Shockley today, or Bald Mountain apples, anything like that, but would have been very common years ago. So what we're coming up on is the heritage apples. This past year, we planted 200 apple trees here. There's 2 representatives of each variety. So there's 100 varieties out here. So we're actually very happy with this. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 great limbs here, scaffold limbs that are going to be the foundation for the tree for growing upward.
How long until these start bearing fruit?
You can bear fruit on the first year, but not at the full load. You're going to get your 80, 90% load on your 4th year. 5th year, you should be at full potential. But we'll probably have a decent crop, maybe 50 to 60% on the 3rd year. So these are pretty fast growers.
So when you get the graft and give it to farmers that are out there wanting to do this, how long are they going to have to wait 4 or 5 years as well?
Yes, they will.
Okay.
So that's why having a lot of material, a lot of growth to cut and give them to, that way they can do several grafts and build an orchard instantly. So like for example, if I cut this limb and gave it to a farmer, they want to do some grafting, all they need is 1 bud. So there's 1, 2, 25 buds that could become a tree here. So that's where that could go. This, I have a feeling I know what this is. Doesn't that look kind of limber to you?
Yeah.
Like a limber twig? Limber twig was a very old variety. The fruit will be out here. You got to be careful when pruning because you cut here, your fruit's gone. Your fruit's gone because it develops these buds on the tips. This is the rootstock right here. Okay? You can see that you got a little elbow here. That's where it was grafted. Everything above here is the historic apple, the legacy apple. Everything below is a modern. So, and you know, it's restrictive. It's a semi-dwarf rootstock. It'll hold this tree to about 14 to 16 feet high versus a seedling. If we just dropped a seed in the ground from an apple, that'd become a massive tree, 30 feet tall. Really too big for people to get up inside.
Now, Ray isn't the first to watch over these hills and fields. The center has been operating strong since the 1930s.
This was a meeting place for the community. It was very rural up here. And so people would come here for sometimes political events or like a farmer's market kind of thing, but also to see the great things the experiment station was working on.
Remnants of the original building still remain, and some have been repurposed for educational use.
How do you preserve food 1930s pre-refrigeration? Pressure canning, in essence, in there. You see the scars on the floor from them moving stuff around. Here's the vat for preheating the cans before they go in the pressure canner. Now it's classroom space. So we got some chairs, we'll bring some kids in here, we'll bring the projector down, a nice little meeting space, repurposing this beautiful structure.
So as the apples, corn, grass, cows, and other mountain-dwelling agricultural varieties continue to grow and often thrive, Ray and his team will continue working hard to supply vital results of soil conditions and climate studies to help farmers flourish all throughout the South. From Blairsville, we journey a few miles south to Watkinsville, where a University of Georgia professor is helping revive a variety of heritage heirloom apples. This gorgeous orchard lies on the private grounds of UGA professor Stephen Mim and serves as a snapshot of what many North Georgia hills may have looked like years ago.
We have here in the background some of approximately 85 varieties of apple trees that are growing here. And these are all varieties that at one time or another grew either in Georgia or in other parts of the South. When we think of apples, we usually think of New England or New York, or more recently we think of Washington State. And that's true now, but it wasn't true necessarily 100 years ago, when actually almost virtually every state in the Union, and the South was no exception, and Georgia was certainly no exception either. And in fact, Georgia in the late 19th, early 20th century became a very important center for apple production, not only regionally, but nationally, developing varieties that would win national awards. In North America alone, 100 years ago, there were approximately 15,000 kinds of different apples. Today, about 3 kinds of apples are the majority of the apples that we consume. When we preserve apples from generation to generation, you don't preserve them by simply planting a seed. You actually have to take a clipping, what's called a scion, off the tree. It's a year old, and then grafted onto what's known as rootstock, which is an apple plant that has been specifically bred for the purpose of being the host, if you will.
Yeah. So it's like you're taking a piece of that tree, putting it here, so that original tree is still going.
That original tree is still going, exactly. That's why these trees are actually historical artifacts as much as they are trees in the here and now. They are this living link to an earlier time in an earlier set of developments.
What was it about the Red Delicious and Golden Delicious that just took off? Like, I'm sure they're not your favorite.
No, they're not. They're not. And I mean no disrespect to the people who originated them. They were developed to be apples that would be prolific in their production and could be shipped long distances, which became essential when apple production shifted from something local, like buying your apples locally or growing your own, to buying them in a supermarket where they had been shipped across the country.
What are we looking at here?
You're looking at an apple as they exist without any spraying, which is to say, when you see the apples in a supermarket, they've been sprayed and treated with fungicides and many other things to basically eliminate any potential for blemishes. This particular orchard, since it's primarily functioning as a preservation orchard, is not hit with a lot of chemical treatments. Partly, incidentally, because it's very useful for me to be able to tell how resistant they are to disease if you don't do anything. And so this is what you end up with, which doesn't affect the flavor, but certainly this is not an apple that's going to attract a lot of people in the local supermarket.
And you might get something unique in a cider.
Yes, absolutely. And whatever cosmetic blemishes they may have for cider, it makes absolutely no difference.
Professor Mim has a passion and deep knowledge for these heritage apple trees. However, growing apple trees, not just here, but anywhere, comes with an array of challenges.
The worst disease that can afflict any tree and actually hit many orchards in Georgia this year quite badly is fire blight, which is a bacterial infection that infects the branches and can, if it gets out of control, actually find its way into the tree itself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It just takes it down.
Takes it down.
So tell me what we're looking at here. They're black.
Yeah, these are Arkansas Black. Another one of the varieties that a couple of the orchards still produce up in the mountains. And they're called Arkansas Black for the obvious reason that they are, when you look at them on the tree, almost entirely black. They're dark, dark, dark. They're also very hard, and they tend to do better once you've let them sit on the counter for a few days or even longer.
Wow.
So
they're good for pies, probably good for cider.
Yep. Yes, definitely. You can definitely use Arkansas Black for cider, for sure. And I have used it in making my own. This tree is known as a Yates, and Yates is one of the few old heirloom varieties that you can find at least in a couple orchards in the state of Georgia, even today. It's noteworthy because of its disease resistance and its apparent use in cider and for making applesauce. It's a very tart, flavorful apple, much smaller than many normal conventional apples, but one that is closely connected to the state of Georgia's history and very popular in orchards a century ago, both up in the mountains but also here in the Piedmont. When you think of apple names, today, you know, the names that we associate, like Red Delicious, are kind of bland names that try to communicate something. Or the Honey Crisp, you know, that's something that says, buy me, right? Whereas the apples that had names 100 years ago were really not developed with the idea of marketing them. So they have kind of funny and sometimes revealing names, like Tar Button or Poorhouse. That Poorhouse probably called because it was something that people who were poor could grow, you know, as a way of making ends meet. The names themselves are deeply revealing oftentimes of where the apple came from or whose property it was originally grown on. Carolina Red June, that's place name, but also kind of capturing some of the qualities of the apple in the title. Whatever their commercial story might have been, and many of them have rather remarkable stories as commercial apples, many of them were just simply grown by a family who had a need for apples. Apples were a great way to store calories over a winter, and you could do all sorts of things with apples. Something that we forget: you can make apple butter, you can make applesauce, you can make apple pies, you can make fried apples, you can make apple cakes, you can make apple cider, both hard and regular sweet. And then of course, if you really want the hard stuff, you can turn it into apple brandy, which is significantly more potent, but is yet another way of turning apples into something usable. We hope that the apple varieties that are being preserved here and elsewhere will ultimately end up being put back in rotation in agritourism sites in the mountains to cater to a growing appetite for older apple varieties and the flavors that came with them.
From mountain hills filled with apples to a Marietta cidery, where a dude and his wife abide. These are the Wheelers, and they have lots of friends. Much of that is Nikki's magnetic personality and Andrew's friendly demeanor, but there's a few more reasons why folks like to gather in these parts. Sports jerseys hanging from the ceiling, Star Wars memorabilia creeps up around every turn, fun little gadgets and games decorate the shelves, and it's also where the dude abides.
In the beverage industry, it's really important to be really cognizant of what your branding is going to be and that you can actually use the name without somebody else having already used it. Many older varieties of apple trees had thorns on them, so we thought it was a good play between tree and thorn and, you know, the sort of similar sounds, so we kind of made it up.
Well, and it's the name of a character in one of our favorite movies, so.
And that is?
The Big Lebowski.
Yes. And it's hard to miss the Big Lebowski, the dude, when you walk around this place.
Yeah, it is.
Is he the inspiration?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds for sure.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. We just, we have a very dude-like vibe, I'd say. You know, very laid back, kind of just take things as they come.
He hates the Eagles.
Yeah.
We launched in late 2013 in our basement.
Yeah, we're just kind of making it at home and figuring out what we liked and what processes worked for us and, you know, the kind of flavor profile we were trying to go for. Yeah, started getting good at it and decided to jump in. We started off with our flagship dry cider. It's a kind of classic, clean, crisp cider. After that, we introduced our ginger cider, which is nice and tasty and crisp, not too spicy on the ginger.
One of the beautiful things about opening the tasting room is that we really get to experiment. Andrew really gets to play with different flavors. We have almost a culinary approach to some of our ciders. We like to take interesting ingredients and kind of see where they take us.
We'll use things like soursop and dragon fruit and things like that. And we'll use various herbs to add different flavors that, you know, will complement some of the additional fruits we're using.
Sometimes it's very ingredient driven. Sometimes it's, you know, our experience at a local restaurant. We want to replicate something or, you know, being inspired by what's around us. Cider was the most popular alcoholic drink in the States before Prohibition. But when Prohibition happened, the apples that are good for cider are not good for really anything else. They're not like an eating apple. So when Prohibition happened, you had temperance people pulling out, literally hacking down apple trees.
Yeah. And a lot of farmers just replace their cider apples with culinary apples or dessert apples and started growing those because they didn't have a use for the cider apples anymore. There was nothing they could do with them.
The United States kind of lost its cider way. A lot of orchards are starting to plant more cider-specific apples now that cider is much more a thing. And there's so much deep knowledge that has to go into making an apple good. It's an honor to be able to kind of take that, all that work, and transform it into something, adding another layer. One of the benefits of American cider kind of having lost its way is we can be a lot more playful than somebody who makes cider in France.
We have a lot more freedom to play and have fun.
This location is where the fun takes place Friday through Sunday, but this great space also transforms into the Treehorn Cannery during the day, when a dedicated group of part-time workers keep the cans coming, filling the shelves at package stores and growler shops all throughout Georgia.
So we use a mobile canner, so you won't see a canning line behind me. You'll just see our tanks in our bar. They bring in the canning line, and we get started very early in the morning, and we usually package about 600 to 800 cases in a day. We do it in as big as batches as possible. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's worth it.
So swing by Marietta to get a taste of the Treehorn, tip your cap to the dude, and enjoy a hard little sample or two of this apple-inspired cider of the South. So as apples big and small, red and black, solid and liquid reestablish themselves on Georgian hillsides and in our bellies, the folks behind the scenes will continue doing the hard work to make it all possible, growing, experimenting, and sharing this special fruit with the people of Georgia. I'm David Zelski. See you at the next Fork in the Road.